Thank you so much for joining me for today's story. I'm thrilled to share that we're just 50 subscribers away from hitting 6,000. What an incredible milestone. If you enjoyed this tale and want to be part of our growing community, please consider hitting that like button. And if you're new here, subscribing would mean the world to me. With your support, we're working towards an amazing goal of 10,000 subscribers by next year. Now let's jump into the story. The stars looked different from lunar base. Captain Elena Dawson stood at the observation deck's curved window, watching Earth hang like a blue jewel in the vast darkness. After 15 years of space exploration, she still found herself captivated by that view. But tomorrow she wouldn't see Earth anymore. Tomorrow she and her crew would embark on humanity's most ambitious mission yet. Beautiful view, isn't it? Dr. Marcus Rhodes joined her at the window, his reflection ghostly against the reinforced glass. The archaeologist's excitement was barely contained. It radiated from him like heat from a furnace. Hard to believe that in 3 months we'll be looking at Mars instead. Elena nodded, her dark hair catching the starlight. Assuming everything goes according to plan. She turned to face Rhodes, noting the way his fingers drummed against his tablet, a nervous habit she'd observed during their 6 months of training together. How's the final equipment check coming along? Dr. O'Neill is still calibrating the quantum sensors, but everything else is ready. Isabella, Dr. Reyes, she's done amazing work with the biocontainment systems. If there's anything alive down there. His voice trailed off, heavy with implication. The structure they'd discovered, buried in Valles Marineris, had sparked endless debate in the scientific community. Some claimed it was natural formation. Others insisted it was proof of ancient alien civilization. The symmetrical patterns were too perfect, too deliberate to be explained away by geological processes. That's why their mission had been fast-tracked, why the best minds in their fields had been gathered. The next morning dawned with the characteristic efficiency of lunar base. The Prometheus II waited in her launch cradle, a masterpiece of engineering gleaming under the floodlights. At 847 feet long, she was the largest deep space vessel ever constructed, built specifically for this mission. Her hull bore the scars of hasty construction. The mission had been pushed forward by 5 years after the structure's discovery. The crew gathered in the primary airlock for final checks. Lieutenant Diana Wolf, their security chief, ran through her checklist with military precision, her augmented eye implant glowing faintly as she scanned their equipment. James Cooper, the chief engineer, was already discussing power consumption rates with Dr. O'Neill, their quantum physicist. The man's Scottish accent grew more pronounced with his enthusiasm. "Captain on deck!" Wolf's voice cut through the chatter, and the crew snapped to attention. Elena surveyed her team, pride swelling in her chest. They were the best Earth had to offer, scientists, soldiers, and explorers, chosen from thousands of candidates. Each had trained for this mission, knowing they might not return. The structure on Mars had changed everything. Humanity needed answers, and they were the ones chosen to find them. "At ease," Elena commanded, moving to stand before them. "We've trained for this moment. We've prepared for every contingency we could imagine. But what we're about to undertake..." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "What we're about to undertake goes beyond anything humanity has ever attempted. That structure has waited millions of years to be discovered. Whatever we find there will change human history forever." Dr. Isabella Reyes, their xenobiologist, stepped forward. "Captain, the latest deep scans from the Mars Orbital Array arrived an hour ago." She projected a hologram from her wrist unit, showing the massive canyon where their target lay buried. "The energy signatures they're unlike anything we've seen before. They're getting stronger." The hologram rotated, zooming in on a cross-section of the structure. It was enormous, larger than any human construction on Mars, and built with a precision that defied explanation. The geometric patterns that had first caught their attention seemed to pulse with a rhythm that shouldn't have been possible so deep underground. The structural analysis confirms it, James Cooper added, his weathered face illuminated by the hologram's blue light. Whatever this thing is, it's not just a building. The entire complex appears to be made from some kind of self-repairing metamaterial. Even after millions of years, there's no significant degradation. Dr. O'Neill adjusted his glasses, his lean frame tense with excitement. The quantum readings are off the scale. If my calculations are correct, there's some kind of temporal anomaly at the heart of the structure. Time itself might behave differently down there. Elena absorbed this information, feeling the weight of command settle more heavily on her shoulders. Any changes to the mission parameters based on these findings? Lieutenant Wolf shook her head, her augmented eye whirring as she analysed the data. Security protocols remain unchanged, Captain, but I've updated our defensive loadout to include additional plasma cutters. If that material really is self-repairing, we might need them. The final hours before launch passed in a blur of activity. Equipment was secured, systems were checked and rechecked, and final messages were sent to loved ones on Earth. Elena recorded her own message last. A brief communication to her brother back in New Zealand. "See you in 8 months," she said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. The Prometheus coup lifted off from Lunar Base at exactly 10:47 a.m. Earth Standard Time on July 15th, 2147. The massive engines fired with a silent fury in the lunar vacuum, pushing the ship free of the moon's gentle gravity. As they accelerated towards their Mars transfer orbit, Elena watched Lunar Base shrink behind them until it was just another point of light among the stars. The first month of their journey passed without incident. The crew settled into their routines, running simulations and analysing the ever more detailed scans of their target. But as they crossed the halfway point to Mars, things began to change. It started with the dreams. Dr. Rhodes was the first to report them, vivid visions of vast underground chambers filled with impossible machinery. He would wake in a cold sweat, his mind filled with images of towering monuments, covered in writing that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. Soon, others began experiencing similar dreams. "It has to be stress," Dr. Reyes suggested during one of their daily briefings. "Deep space missions often trigger unusual psychological responses." But Elena wasn't convinced. The dreams were too specific, too consistent among the crew, and there were other oddities, instrument readings that couldn't be explained, phantom energy signatures that appeared and disappeared before they could be properly recorded. 2 months into their journey, they recorded the first definitive anomaly. The quantum sensors Dr. O'Neill had been monitoring so carefully detected a surge of unknown energy emanating from Mars. The surge lasted exactly 3.8 seconds and seemed to ripple through space-time itself. It's like it knows we're coming," O'Neill whispered, staring at the readings with a mixture of fear and fascination. Elena stood at the bridge's main viewport, watching Mars grow larger with each passing day. The red planet hung against the black of space like a drop of blood, its surface scarred by ancient catastrophes. Somewhere in those scars lay their destination, and perhaps the greatest discovery in human history. Or, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered, perhaps something else entirely. Something that had been waiting, patient and ancient, for someone to find it. Something that was finally stirring after millions of years of slumber. As they began their final approach to Mars, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just going on an archaeological expedition. They were walking into something far older and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. And deep beneath the Martian surface, in darkness that had lasted for millions of years, something ancient began to wake. The Prometheus the 2's landing thrusters kicked up clouds of red dust as they descended into Valles Marineris. The massive canyon walls rose around them like the jaws of some ancient beast, their layered striations telling a geological story millions of years old. But it wasn't geology they had come to study. "Final approach," James Cooper announced from the pilot's seat, his hands dancing over the controls, compensating for crosswinds. Surface conditions are within expected parameters. Elena watched through the forward viewport as their landing site came into view. Previous missions had established a small outpost here, Base Camp Alpha, but it looked tiny and insignificant against the massive scale of the Martian landscape. The structure they sought lay beneath those rusty rocks, waiting. "Energy readings are spiking," Dr. O'Neill reported, his voice tense. "Whatever's down there, it's reacting to our presence." The landing was textbook perfect, despite the challenging conditions. As the dust settled around them, Elena felt the weight of the moment. They were about to take humanity's first steps toward uncovering an alien civilization. The team spent the first 3 days establishing their base of operations. The old outpost needed updating, and their specialized equipment required careful calibration in the Martian environment. Dr. Reyes set up a mobile laboratory, filling it with sensitive detection equipment designed to identify any signs of biological activity. Lieutenant Wolf established a security perimeter, her augmented eye constantly scanning for any anomalies. It was on the 4th day that they made their first attempt to reach the structure. The drilling equipment they brought was the most advanced ever created, designed specifically for this mission. As they began their first bore into the Martian crust, however, they encountered something unexpected. "This isn't right," Cooper muttered, staring at the readouts. "The drill bit should be cutting through sedimentary rock, but it's meeting resistance. It's like the ground is pushing back." Dr. Rhodes rushed to examine the core samples they'd managed to extract. "These readings are impossible. The molecular structure of this material, it's not natural. It's engineered." Eleanor peered through the sample viewer. The core sample seemed to shimmer slightly, its surface patterns shifting in ways that defied explanation. "Dr. O'Neill, what are we looking at?" The quantum physicist adjusted his instruments, frowning. "It appears to be some kind of programmable matter. The atomic structure is fluid. It's responding to external stimuli. In all my years of research, I've never seen anything like this." As they watched, the surface of the sample began to change. Tiny patterns emerged, like circuit boards etched by an invisible hand, then faded away again. Dr. Reyes quickly placed it in a containment field. "Look at this," she said, pointing to her monitors. "It's generating its own electromagnetic field. But the pattern isn't random, it's organized. Almost like it's trying to communicate," Dr. Rhodes finished. The discovery forced them to reassess their entire approach. Traditional drilling methods wouldn't work. They needed to find another way in. As they reviewed their options, the dreams among the crew intensified. Lieutenant Wolf reported waking from a vision of enormous chambers filled with swirling liquid metal that moved with purpose and intelligence. Dr. Reyes described dreams of vast archives containing the knowledge of 1,000 worlds, all pulsing with an inner light. Even Cooper, usually the most pragmatic of them all, spoke of dreaming about machines that could think and grow like living things. A breakthrough came on their 10th day on Mars. Dr. O'Neill detected a pattern in the energy emissions from beneath the surface, a repeating sequence that couldn't be natural. After analyzing it for hours, he made a startling discovery. "It's a key," he announced during their evening briefing. "The sequence, it's showing us how to reconfigure our equipment to match the resonant frequency of the material we're trying to penetrate." Working around the clock, they modified their drilling equipment according to O'Neill's calculations. The new approach didn't try to cut through the material. Instead, it generated a field that caused the engineered matter to temporarily alter its state, creating a passage through which they could descend. The first successful breach occurred at dawn. The modified drill created a perfect circular opening, 2 meters in diameter, descending into darkness. As they gathered around the hole, their helmet lights illuminating the shaft, Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the Martian cold. "The walls," Dr. Rhodes whispered, reaching out to touch the perfectly smooth surface of the shaft. "They're covered in markings." Their lights revealed intricate patterns etched into the walls, symbols and diagrams that seemed to shift and change as they watched. But most disturbing was the fact that the markings appeared to be fresh, as if they were being created in real time. "It's the same programmable matter," Cooper confirmed, scanning the walls. "The entire structure might be made of it. But who could have created something like this? And why?" The shaft descended at a precise 45-degree angle, spiraling down into the Martian crust. As they prepared their descent equipment, their instruments detected something new, a low-frequency vibration emanating from below, like the heartbeat of some enormous creature. "We should establish a base camp here," Elena decided, looking at the opening. "Tomorrow we make our first descent. Whatever's down there has waited millions of years. It can wait one more night." That night, as the team tried to rest, the vibrations grew stronger. The Martian wind howled outside their habitat, carrying with it a sound that might have been the whisper of ancient machines stirring in their long slumber. And in the darkness of the shaft, unseen by human eyes, the walls continued to shift and change, preparing for the arrival of those who had finally come to wake them. Dr. Reyes's monitoring equipment recorded a sudden surge of activity just before dawn, complex patterns of energy that suggested something vast and incomprehensible was moving deep beneath their feet. As the sun rose over the rim of Valles Marineris, casting long shadows across the Martian surface, Elena knew they were about to cross a threshold from which there would be no return. The ancient guardians of Mars were stirring, and humanity's greatest discovery was about to become their deadliest challenge. The descent into darkness began at first light. Elena led the initial exploration team, consisting of Dr. Rhodes, Lieutenant Wolfe, and Cooper. Dr. O'Neill and Dr. Reyes remained at the surface camp to monitor their progress and manage the sophisticated array of sensing equipment. Their path down the shaft was illuminated by strips of light that seemed to emerge from the walls themselves, a reaction to their presence that both fascinated and disturbed them. The programmable matter responded to their movement, creating smooth handholds and platforms where moments before there had been only sleek, featureless surfaces. "It's like the whole structure is alive," Cooper muttered, his voice tight with a mixture of awe and unease. His handheld scanner pulsed steadily, mapping their descent in 3 dimensions. "The material density keeps changing. These walls could be meters thick or micro paper thin. There's no way to tell." They had descended nearly half a kilometer when they encountered the first chamber. The shaft opened suddenly into a vast space that their lights couldn't fully illuminate. The ceiling arched away into darkness, supported by columns that seemed to be composed of flowing liquid metal, frozen in mid-motion. Dr. Rhodes approached one of the columns, his archaeologist's instincts overwhelming his caution. "Incredible," he breathed, watching as patterns rippled across the surface of the column in response to his proximity. "These aren't just random reactions, they're information. The entire structure is trying to communicate with us." Lieutenant Wolfe's augmented eye whirred as she scanned the chamber. "Movement detected," she announced sharply. "Multiple points, all around us." They all heard it then, a sound like mercury droplets falling on glass, but deeper, more resonant. The walls of the chamber had begun to shift, sections folding and unfolding, like enormous origami constructs made of liquid metal. "Look there!" Cooper pointed to a far corner of the chamber where the wall had peeled back to reveal a new passage. Above the opening, symbols began to form, glowing with an inner light. Dr. Rhodes rushed to capture images of the symbols. They're similar to the markings we saw in the shaft, but more complex. He trailed off as the symbols began to move, rearranging themselves before his eyes. Elena felt a sudden pressure in her head, accompanied by a series of images that flashed through her mind. Vast machines building themselves from raw matter, cities that grew and changed like living organisms, and something else, a presence that watched and waited. "Everyone else feel that?" she asked, knowing from their expressions that they had. "It's trying to show us something," Dr. Rhodes said, his voice filled with excitement. "The structure isn't just responding to us, it's teaching us how to navigate it." Lieutenant Wolf raised her weapon slightly. "Or it's herding us exactly where it wants us to go." The decision was made for them when the shaft they had descended began to seal itself, the programmable matter flowing like quicksilver to close off their retreat. The only way forward was through the newly revealed passage. "O'Neill, Reyes, are you copying this?" Elena spoke into her comm unit. Dr. O'Neill's voice came back distorted but clear enough. "Affirmative, Captain. We're getting incredible readings from your location. The energy signatures are off the charts. Whatever that structure is, it's becoming more active by the minute." They proceeded down the new passage, which seemed to construct itself ahead of them as they walked. The walls pulsed with patterns of light that grew more complex and organized, forming what appeared to be star charts and diagrams of impossible machines. Cooper stopped suddenly, holding up his scanner. "Captain, you need to see this. The material composition of these walls, it's changing. The molecular structure is becoming more ordered, more crystalline, but not in any way I've ever seen. It's like the whole place is waking up." The passage opened into a second chamber, smaller than the first, but filled with what could only be described as technology. Pedestals of the same liquid metal rose from the floor, each supporting objects that defied physics. Geometric shapes that existed in more dimensions than should be possible. Spheres of energy that cast shadows in directions that hurt the eyes to look at. "This is it," Dr. Rhodes whispered, moving from pedestal to pedestal. "This is what we came to find. Proof of their existence, their legacy." Lieutenant Wolf's augmented eye suddenly flared bright red. "Energy spike. Everyone down." The warning came just as one of the pedestals began to transform. The liquid metal surface flowed upward, taking shape with terrible purpose. The team watched in horror as the material formed into a figure humanoid but wrong, its proportions subtly alien. The surface of its body rippled like quicksilver, and where its face should have been, there was only a smooth, reflective surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. "Nobody move," Elena ordered, her voice steady, despite the fear that gripped her. The figure stood motionless, its featureless face oriented toward them. Then, with a sound like chimes in an alien wind, more pedestals began to transform. "O'Neill," Elena spoke into her comm, never taking her eyes off the figure. "Please tell me you're seeing this." Only static answered her. They were cut off. The first figure took a step forward, its movements liquid smooth. As it moved, the reflective surface of its face began to ripple, and symbols appeared, the same complex patterns they had seen on the walls, but moving with terrible speed. Dr. Rhodes stared at the symbols, his face pale. "Captain," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "I don't think these are guardians. They're interfaces, the real guardians." He swallowed hard. The real guardians are the ones they were built to contain. A low rumble shook the chamber, and in the darkness beyond the liquid metal figures, something ancient and vast began to move. The chamber shuddered again, and deep within the structure, a sound like the grinding of massive gears echoed through the alien corridors. The liquid metal figures remained motionless, their featureless faces still displaying rapidly shifting symbols. "We need to move," Lieutenant Wolf said, her augmented eye scanning rapidly. "That sound is getting closer, and these energy readings are becoming unstable." Before anyone could respond, the symbols on the nearest figure's face changed pattern, and a beam of light projected from it, creating a three-dimensional hologram in the center of the chamber. The image showed Mars as it must have looked millions of years ago, alive, green, with vast oceans and gleaming cities that reached into the sky. "It's showing us their history," Dr. Rhodes breathed, watching as the hologram shifted and changed. The scene advanced rapidly, showing the civilization's rise achievements, beyond human comprehension, technologies that could reshape reality itself. But then the image darkened. New shapes appeared in the hologram, beings of pure energy, ancient and terrible. The Martian cities burned. The oceans boiled away. The atmosphere itself was torn apart. They didn't just die out, Elena realized, watching the devastation unfold. They were at war. A war they lost. The hologram shifted again, showing the construction of the structure they now stood in. But it wasn't just a tomb or a museum. It was a prison. The liquid metal beings weren't guardians. They were wardens, created to contain something far worse. Cooper's scanner suddenly emitted a high-pitched whine. "Captain, whatever's coming, it's big. The density readings are off the scale." The liquid metal figures moved in perfect unison, forming a circle around the team. Their faces displayed new symbols. A warning, clear even without translation. "Leave. Now." "This is a containment facility," Dr. Rhodes said, his voice shaking. "The Martians, they didn't just lose their war. They sacrificed their entire civilization to trap their enemies here, beneath the surface. And we just breached the prison." The grinding sound grew louder, and with it came a sensation of pressure, not physical but mental. Images flooded their minds. Vast beings of energy and darkness, ancient when the stars were young, imprisoned for crimes against existence itself. "Fall back to the entrance," Elena ordered, but even as she spoke, the passage they had entered through began to seal itself. The liquid metal figures remained in their circle, but their surfaces had begun to ripple more violently, preparing for what was coming. Lieutenant Wolf raised her weapon, though she must have known it would be useless against what approached. "Captain, my augmented vision is picking up something. It's like looking at a hole in space itself." The far wall of the chamber suddenly distorted, the programmable matter twisting and flowing away from a point of absolute darkness. The pressure in their minds increased, bringing with it alien thoughts and memories, endless hunger, ancient rage, and the desire to consume all they touched. "The Guardians!" Dr. Rhodes shouted over the growing chaos. "They're not trying to stop us, they're trying to help us contain it." The liquid metal figures began to move, their forms flowing and combining into complex geometric patterns. Energy crackled between them, forming barriers of light that held back the encroaching darkness. Elena's comm unit suddenly crackled to life, filled with Dr. O'Neill's panicked voice. "Captain, the energy readings, they're cascading. Whatever's happening down there is affecting the entire structure. Dr. Reyes's instruments are detecting biological activity on a massive scale." The darkness pushed against the Guardian's barriers, and through it came something that human eyes were never meant to see. Shapes that existed in geometries that violated the laws of physics. Beings of such alien nature that merely looking at them caused physical pain. Cooper's scanner exploded in a shower of sparks. "The containment field is failing. These things, they're not just prisoners, they're planet killers, reality devourers." One of the liquid metal guardians turned its face toward Elena, and for the first time the symbols formed into something she could understand. A choice. The structure's systems were failing. Millions of years of imprisonment had weakened them, but deep within the facility lay a failsafe. a weapon of last resort that could destroy everything. The prisoners, the structure, and anyone inside it. "Captain," Lieutenant Wolf called out, her augmented eye flickering as it tried to process what it was seeing. "We have maybe minutes before those barriers fail completely. Whatever we're going to do, it needs to be now." The grinding sound reached a crescendo, and the darkness began to seep through the Guardian's barriers. Where it touched the chamber walls, the programmable matter withered and died, turning to dust. The ancient prisoners were awakening fully now, and their hunger had not diminished over millions of years of captivity. Elena looked at her team, at Cooper's determined face, at Dr. Rhodes's wide-eyed realization of truths too terrible for human minds, at Lieutenant Wolf's steady stance even in the face of cosmic horror. They had come to Mars seeking knowledge, but they had found something far more terrifying, a responsibility that could mean the difference between humanity's survival and its extinction. The Guardian's message became clearer. The failsafe lay deeper within the structure, in chambers that held the last and most terrible weapons of a dying civilization. But reaching it would mean going further in, not escaping to the surface. "O'Neill," Elena spoke into her comm, her voice tight with determination. "Begin evacuation procedures for the surface team. Get everyone to minimum safe distance from the structure." "Captain," Dr. Rhodes grabbed her arm, "if we go deeper, if we use whatever weapon they built, we might not make it back." Elena watched as another section of the barrier began to fail, the darkness pushing through with inexorable force. "If we don't," she replied, "none of us will survive anyway. And neither will Earth." The liquid metal Guardians parted, creating a new passage, one that led down, toward the heart of their ancient prison, toward either salvation or destruction. "Make your choice," Elena told her team. "I won't order anyone to come with me." The darkness surged against the barriers again, and through it came a sound, not physical, but a psychic scream of triumph and hunger that echoed through their minds. The ancient prisoners of Mars were almost free, and somewhere far below, waiting in chambers untouched by human hands, lay a weapon that could end it all, if they could reach it in time. Without hesitation, Lieutenant Wolf stepped to Elena's side, her weapon held ready despite its uselessness against their enemy. Cooper followed, already pulling out his backup scanner. Dr. Rhodes lingered only long enough to transmit one final data burst to the surface team before joining them. The new passage plunged downward at an impossible angle, yet they could walk normally as if gravity itself bent to the will of the structure's ancient architects. The liquid metal Guardians flowed alongside them through the walls, their surfaces constantly shifting as they maintained the barriers against the encroaching darkness. "The readings are unlike anything I've ever seen," Cooper said, his voice hushed as he studied his backup scanner. "It's like we're walking through a tear in space-time. These corridors, they're not just passages, they're quantum tunnels." Dr. Rhodes's tablet flickered as it tried to process the symbols flowing across the walls. The messages are becoming clearer. The Martians didn't just build this prison, they folded space itself to create it. The entire structure exists partially outside normal space-time. A violent tremor shook the passage, and behind them they heard the sound of reality tearing. The prisoners were following, pushing against the Guardian's weakening containment. "Captain," Dr. O'Neill's voice crackled through their comms, heavily distorted. "The surface team is evacuating, but you need to note the structure's influence is spreading. The quantum distortions are affecting everything within a 10-kilometer radius and growing." Elena pressed forward, feeling the weight of every second. How long until total containment failure? "At current rates," O'Neill's voice was grim, 20 minutes, maybe less. "And Captain, we're detecting similar energy signatures starting to appear all over Mars. Whatever you woke up, it's not just in that structure. The whole planet was their prison." The passage opened into a new chamber, but this one was different. The walls were covered in what looked like frozen lightning, patterns of energy trapped in mid-strike. In the center stood a pillar of pure darkness, around which orbited rings of the liquid metal, moving faster than the eye could follow. "The weapon," Dr. Rhodes whispered, approaching the pillar. "This has to be part of it. The symbols, they're talking about something called the Umbra Core." Lieutenant Wolf's augmented eye suddenly emitted a warning tone. "Movement above!" They looked up to see the darkness seeping through the ceiling, but this was different from before. It had form now, purpose. As they watched in horror, it began to take shape, a writhing mass of geometries that shouldn't exist, bending light and space around it. One of the liquid metal guardians flowed forward, its surface displaying urgent symbols. Dr. Rhodes translated frantically. "It's saying we need to synchronize the core with our own biological signatures. The weapon, it needs living operators." "Why?" Elena demanded, even as more of the ancient prisoners began to manifest around them. "Why would it need that?" The Guardian's response came in a flood of images. The final days of the Martian civilization, their desperate last stand. The weapon hadn't just been designed to destroy the prisoners. It was meant to convert the very life force of its operators into a form of energy that could unmake the prisoners' impossible existence. They sacrificed themselves, Cooper realized, looking at the pillar with new understanding. The last of the Martians, they gave their lives to power the initial imprisonment. Another tremor rocked the chamber, stronger than before. Through their comms came Dr. Reyes's voice, thick with fear. "Captain, the distortions are reaching critical levels. We're seeing atmospheric changes across the entire planet. If those things fully manifest." The darkness above them condensed further, taking on a form that hurt to look at, all angles and curves that seemed to fold through additional dimensions. When it spoke, the words formed directly in their minds, ancient and terrible. "Free, hungry, consume." The liquid metal guardians responded instantly, forming a dome of energy around the team. But the strain was visible in the way their surfaces rippled and distorted. Elena looked at the pillar, the Umbra Core, then at her team. The choice before them was impossible, yet it had to be made. "Dr. Rhodes, how many operators does it need?" He checked the symbols again, his face paling. 3. It needs 3 living souls to power the reset sequence. "No," Cooper stepped forward. "Captain, there has to be another way." Another surge of darkness poured into the chamber, and with it came more of the prisoners. Their forms were becoming more solid, more real, as the ancient containment field continued to fail. The Guardian's barriers flickered dangerously. Devour, consume, all. "There isn't time for another way," Elena said, her voice steady despite the fear that gripped her. "Lieutenant Wolf, get Cooper and Dr. Rhodes back to the surface. That's an order." "Captain," Wolf began to protest, but Elena cut her off. "Someone has to survive to warn Earth," she said. "Someone has to tell them what's waiting out here." She turned to the nearest Guardian. "Can you show them the way out?" The Guardian's surface rippled in acknowledgement, and a new passage began to form in the chamber wall. "Elena, please," Dr. Rhodes stepped forward. "The knowledge here, what we could learn, will mean nothing if those things reach Earth." She looked at each of them in turn, memorizing their faces. "Now go. That's my final order." Lieutenant Wolf snapped to attention, giving a sharp salute that contained all the words she couldn't say. Then, she grabbed Cooper's arm and pulled him toward the escape passage. Dr. Rhodes lingered for a moment longer. "Captain, do you want me to send any message to—" "Tell my brother I'm sorry I won't make it to his wedding." Elena managed a small smile. "Now run." As her team disappeared into the passage, Elena turned back to the Umbra Core. The Guardians moved closer, their surfaces displaying new symbols. instructions for what she would have to do. The darkness above surged against the barriers again, and this time they nearly failed completely. The ancient prisoners were almost free, their hunger unchanged by millions of years of captivity. "Well," Elena said to the Guardians as she approached the pillar, "show me how to end this." The liquid metal flowed around her, preparing for the final protocol. As the barriers began to fail and darkness flooded the chamber, Elena placed her hands on the Umbra core and felt its ancient power begin to flow through her. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, in a chamber built by a long-dead civilization, Captain Elena Dawson prepared to join the ranks of those who had given everything to keep the universe safe from horrors beyond imagination. The moment Elena's hands touched the Umbra core, the universe changed around her. Her consciousness expanded, connecting with the ancient Martian technology in ways her human mind could barely comprehend. Through this connection, she finally understood the true nature of their discovery and the price of salvation. The liquid metal guardians flowed around her in complex patterns, their movements creating a symphony of light and energy. Through their shared connection, they showed her everything. The rise of the Martian civilization, their discovery of the spaces between realities, and their fateful encounter with the beings they'd ultimately imprisoned. "Release," the prisoners demanded, their thoughts hammering against her mind. Hunger, endless. But now Eleanor could see them clearly. Beings of pure entropy, ancient consumers of reality itself. They had devoured countless civilizations before the Martians had finally found a way to stop them. The cost had been an entire world, an entire species, sacrificing themselves to power the prison that would contain these cosmic horrors. Meanwhile, through the twisting quantum tunnels above, her team raced for the surface. Lieutenant Wolf led the way, her augmented eye cutting through the dimensional distortions that made the passages shift and change. Cooper followed, his scanner tracking the growing instabilities in the structure. Dr. Rhodes brought up the rear, still recording everything despite their desperate flight. "The energy readings are going critical," Cooper shouted as they ran. "Whatever the captain's doing down there, it's affecting the entire structure." The walls around them had begun to pulse with a deep, violet light. The liquid metal guardian leading them moved faster, urging them to greater speed. Behind them, they could hear the sound of reality tearing itself apart as the prisoners fought against their weakening bonds. Back in the chamber of the Umbra core, Elena felt the ancient weapon's power flowing through her veins. The guardians had merged with the chamber itself, their liquid metal forms creating complex geometric patterns that channeled unimaginable energies. "Show me," she commanded, and the guardians responded. The knowledge of how to activate the weapon flooded her mind, and with it came the understanding of what it would cost. The weapon didn't just need life force, it needed consciousness will, the very essence of sapient thought. It would use her mind as a template to create a new pattern of reality, one that would reinforce the prison and drive the ancient horrors back into their dimensional cage. Through her neural connection to the structure, Eleanor could feel her team's desperate race to escape. They were nearly at the halfway point, but time was running out. The prisoners were breaking free faster now, their entropy-laden forms beginning to manifest throughout the structure. Devour all, they promised, threatened, their thoughts like acid in her mind. Consume reality. Endless hunger. "Not today," Elena whispered, and began the activation sequence. The team had reached a massive vertical shaft when the first wave of energy hit them. The walls rippled like water, and for a moment they could see through them, not just to the Martian rock beyond, but into other dimensions, other realities. "Keep moving," Lieutenant Wolf ordered, helping Cooper up a particularly difficult section. "We're running out of time." Dr. Rhodes paused to look back down the shaft. The readings, they're unlike anything we've ever seen. The energy output is approaching stellar levels. In the chamber of the Umbra core, Elena's consciousness expanded further. She could feel the structure's systems integrating with her mind, using her thoughts, her memories, her very identity as a framework to reshape local space-time. The pain was indescribable, but with it came a sense of purpose that transcended physical sensation. The Guardians moved faster now, their patterns growing more complex as they channeled the weapon's power through her. Through their connection, she could feel their gratitude and their sorrow. They had waited millions of years for this moment, for someone willing to take up the mantle of those long-dead Martian heroes who had first imprisoned the ancient horrors. "Stop," the prisoners demanded, their forms pressing against the barriers of reality itself. Hunger eternal, consumption infinite. Elena smiled through the pain. "Let me show you something stronger than hunger." She opened her mind fully to the weapon's power, offering every memory, every thought, every piece of her consciousness to the ancient machinery. Images flashed through her mind. Her childhood in New Zealand, her first spaceflight, the faces of her crew, her brother's upcoming wedding she would never attend. Each memory became a strand in a new web of reality, a pattern that would reinforce the dimensional prison. The team had almost reached the surface when the structure began to sing. The sound came from everywhere at once, a harmonic resonance that seemed to vibrate through every atom of existence. "The weapon's activating," Cooper shouted over the noise. 30 seconds to full power." The liquid metal guardian urged them forward, with increasing urgency. They could see the entrance shaft now, the Martian sky visible above them, like a promise of salvation. In the chamber of the Umbra core, Elena had ceased to be merely human. Her consciousness had merged with the ancient weapon, her identity becoming the key that would lock the prison once again. The Guardians moved in perfect synchronization with her thoughts, their liquid metal forms creating a cocoon of energy around her and the core. The prisoners made one final assault, their impossible forms tearing through the last barriers, but they were too late. Elena opened her eyes that now saw into dimensions beyond human comprehension, and spoke her final words, for Earth, for Mars, for everything they would destroy. She released the weapon's full power. Reality buckled. The team threw themselves through the entrance shaft just as the first wave of energy reached the surface. Behind them, the structure began to fold in on itself, not collapsing but transforming, reorganizing according to geometries that human mathematics had never imagined. Dr. O'Neill and Dr. Reyes were waiting with the emergency transport, ready for immediate evacuation. As they pulled away from the site, they watched the impossible unfold. The surface of Mars itself seemed to ripple, and for a moment they could see the structure for what it truly was. Not just a building, or a tomb, or even a prison, but a fold in reality itself, a knot in the fabric of space-time that would hold the ancient horrors for another 1,000,000 years. The light that erupted from the site defied description. Colours that shouldn't exist, patterns that hurt the mind to witness. When it faded, the structure had changed. The liquid metal had spread, covering the entire area in a seamless shell that pulsed with a faint, rhythmic glow. Weeks later, after the debriefings and the arguments about what to tell the public, after the nightmares had begun to fade, Dr. Rhodes made one final discovery. Among the data they brought back was a message, encoded in the liquid metal's patterns. When translated, it was simple but profound. The price of existence is eternal vigilance. We stand guard, we remember, we endure. And deep beneath the surface of Mars, in a chamber that existed partially outside normal space-time, Captain Elena Dawson's consciousness lived on as part of the Eternal Watch, her sacrifice joining those of the ancient Martians in keeping the universe safe from horrors beyond imagination. The ancient Guardians had found a new companion in their endless vigil, and the prison held strong, its barriers reinforced by the power of a human soul who had chosen to give everything to save not just her world, but all of reality itself.